everybody. My name is Tony Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. Today I have a special author because I think she rings the bell not only for my readers, but for sports fans. You're going to know the name right away. So I'm going to say who it is. It's Ann Liguori. Thank you, Ann, for being here. Of course, I knew who you were before the book, but I thought I really enjoyed reading your book, and I'll tell you why. Like, I wasn't expecting for those people who don't know, she's had an illustrious career in sports as a communications, I say, specialist, right? And one of I think the first woman to have a show on the Fan, right? A
That's
long
right.
show on the Fan, right? And the Golf Channel, you had a talk show as well. You still do, you still keep your hand in, you're still writing, you're still interviewing people. And I mean, what a career, and I'd love to get into even besides the book, some of the people that you've interviewed, because it had to be amazing. Uh, but I wanted to start off with what I thought of the book. I went into it really not knowing what to expect. I mean, I knew it was about famous golf, sports, famous athletes, who had succeeded in golf. But I was pleasantly surprised because I don't have an interest in golf, right? How much I loved this book because you took everybody's experience and as different as people were coming to it, right? There's just this array of like they all came from different backgrounds and had different life experiences to get to that point. And what they all had in common was this shared passion for golf. And they all told such a positive message, right? At the end of the day, you're talking about like sportsmanship, integrity, faith, patience, right? And there were all these super positive messages and what permeated these people, to get to that level of success, right? So to tell that story, I mean, I really think gratitude, right? And I think that's super important, especially at our time in history right now. It was a really positive book. I felt like I knew everybody by the end of the book. Like I had sat and had tea with everyone and just, shot the breeze, listening to their stories. So I'm going to start with that compliment. It's a
Thank
wonderful
you.
book.
I really appreciate that. And here's what it looks like: Life on the Green, Lessons in Wisdom from Legends of Golf, where I actually picked 12 legends in golf. 12 Hall of Fame personalities, 6 men, 6 women. I wanted to make sure we got women in there equally. And it's really what these legends bring from their iconic golf careers to their day-to-day lives. So it's really about life wisdom. So the most diehard golf fans, obviously I'm at the US Open right now, at Oakmont. I'm in my radio booth for the Fan, and they're diehard golf media here who cover these tournaments all the time. They're going to love the book because these legends, from Jack Nicklaus to Nancy Lopez to Annika Sorenstam, Bernard Longer, Tom Watson, Padraig Harrington, Renee Powell, Jan Stevenson. I mean, just so many great golf personalities, legends. They tell great stories about their careers and
Yeah.
stories that maybe very few of these people have heard. They've heard a lot of stories, but maybe not all the stories in this book. But beyond that, if you're not a golfer, as you say, the messages are so uplifting and they apply to you, they apply to me, they apply to men, they apply to women, young and old. And it's those messages: patience, pursue your passion. Gary Player, who is 90 years young, talks about pursuing your passion. I just was at his birthday gala a couple of months ago, and he plays golf every day. He still works out every day. And he's just so happy and so willing to share his experiences and wisdom to everybody, to anybody who wants to listen. And he's so wise. He's traveled the world. He's won more international golf victories than anybody. And so I want to listen to somebody like that, who has so much wisdom to offer. And so he has a lot of wisdom in his chapter. But every one of the personalities in the book shares different lessons, life lessons. And what I did is I interviewed each one, separately and spent a lot of time with each one of these personalities. And I tried to kind of zero in on themes that were unique to that person and different from the other person. And I came up with so many, they all came up with different, you know, they all different pearls of wisdom. So it worked out great. And they all thanked me for including them in the book, which is unbelievable that they would thank me. I was so, just so happy that they all said, yes, I'd love to be in your book. I'm honored to be in your book. And I want to tell my stories. And so I'm very happy with what we came up with. It's really a treasure chest of life wisdom.
It is. I mean, I liked Pedrick Harrington. I liked that he talked about playing with fear, right? Because I think that's true of almost anything, right? Actors before they step out on the stage, lawyers before they step into a courtroom. I mean, there's lots of experiences where, or jobs that you have where fear is part of it, right?
That's right.
It
And
helps thrust you to the next level, and without fear, some people would say or argue that they're not as good or they wouldn't be as good. And I thought that was a really important and interesting point that he made.
yeah, I was just astounded that he revealed that he's not only nervous when he goes to the tee, the first tee, but he is fearful,
Yeah.
which is pretty intense. I mean, here's a guy who's won 3 major championships. He's, just a great golfer. He plays on the Champions Tour now, the Senior Tour, and he also still plays some PGA Tour events. And you would think I mean, I can imagine him being nervous like anybody's nervous. But then I was thinking about it and I thought, yeah, you know what? There's so much expectation on these champions to perform great each and every time they get out there. And so his message is really one for all of us. We all have fear in whatever we are pursuing, or day to day, there may be some, fear creeping up in our lives, but he said, embrace it. And he uses it as adrenaline to focus on the task at hand. And he's suggesting that we do the same off the course, which I think is great advice.
I agree. I mean, I like Jack Nicklaus, who's, by the way, I have a friend who named their dog after him. The full name.
Sure.
That's
Oh,
the
okay.
dog's name. Jack Nicklaus.
I
But
have a friend who has 2 golden retrievers. One's name is Jack and one's name is Arnie, for Arnold Palmer. So
so that's always kind of cute, so I had to mention that just because. But what I liked about him, I mean, he talked about family, which of course I think is more common. Who's going to argue with you that you don't need, family is not kind of the most important thing. But I liked that he talked about sportsmanship, right? Because sportsmanship, I think, is what's lacking a little bit sometimes now across many, not only teams, not only different types of sports, but I mean, I think in life, I mean, we've developed sort of a culture of, winning.
Jack Nicklaus has always been a great sport. And the thing about golf is, you can have intense rivalries with somebody like Jack Nicklaus had a rivalry against Arnold Palmer, and Tom Watson's rivalry against Jack Nicklaus. But they were really intense competitors against each other, but they were great friends. And so the golf world is very close knit. And a lot of the top players in the world today are very friendly with their mates, basically, with the guys that they, try to beat every day out on the golf course. So golf has that special quality about it where you call your own penalties on yourself. You call it's full of integrity, and that's part of Jack Nicklaus's chapter, sportsmanship and integrity. And the sport of golf is really the only sport where a player calls his own penalties, which is just uncanny. I mean, a lot of other sports you just try to get away with as much as you can. Hopefully the referee looks the other way and isn't seeing, something that a foul or something that you've committed. In golf, you call your own, penalty strokes. Oh, I made a mistake. I got to take a drop here, and I have a one-shot penalty. So it's a very different kind of sport in terms of sportsmanship, and I think I don't see any other sport that even compares to golf in the integrity and honesty category. So yeah, Jack's always been looked up upon as a true gentleman and just a great family man. He has 5 children and 27 grandchildren and a couple
Yeah.
great grandchildren now. And Barbara Nicholas, his wife of over 60 years, they have an incredible relationship. She was just honored at his golf event in Ohio at the Memorial Tournament. Of all the people they could honor, anybody in the world in golf, they honored Barbara Nicholas. She really is the strength behind the great Jack Nicklaus. And so he talks a lot about Barbara in that chapter. And it's just great. He's a great role model for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting what you said because it's sort of like the Supreme Court, right? The Scalia and Ginsburg, right? They were uh, totally opposing points of view in a courtroom, but they had a great friendship, right? A love of the opera, and they would do things together on the outside. They had a respect for each other, and I think that's so important in the world, like to have respect for your competitors. They oftentimes drive you to do better. They bring out the best in you to a certain extent. And I think even if they don't, I mean, I think you just have to have respect for,
Oh,
somebody.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
look at Nancy Lopez and Jan Stevenson. They played on the LPGA in the 70s and early 80s. And, very cutthroat, very competitive on the course, but they're best of friends off the course. And when Jan Stevenson finally got into the Hall of Fame, it was Nancy Lopez who called her and broke the news. And Nancy was just sobbing. She was so happy for her friend Jan Stevenson that Jan finally got into the Hall of Fame. And I don't know if you've gotten to the Jan Stevenson chapter yet, but it's just incredible. Her story. She came over from Australia, blonde hair, blue-eyed, rookie in the United States, playing on the LPGA tour. And because she was so attractive, the LPGA tour back then in the 70s used her as kind of like the symbol of the LPGA to do
Yeah.
television commercials and to appear in sponsorship meetings. And she said, boy, if I would have practiced more, I could have won more titles. But much to the dismay of her colleagues on the LPGA tour who thought that the tour should not be using sex appeal to sell the LPGA tour. And so she made a lot of enemies with her fellow competitors back then, whether they resented the fact that they were using her to sell the tour, or they were maybe jealous because she got all these other opportunities. She once posed in a bathtub with a bunch of golf balls covering her naked body. So it got the LPGA a lot of attention, and many people think that it really kind of kept the LPGA going for a while back in the 70s. So through all that, all the ups and downs of an incredible career, Jan Stevenson got into the Hall of Fame in 2019. And as I say, back to your point about respect, she has tremendous respect from Nancy Lopez and Amy Alcott and all the other personalities that played and remember her career.
I have to ask this. I mean, it's sort of off topic for your book, but can you remember the first time your very first interview?
My very first interview. Well, I've done so many interviews, but I can tell you for my TV show, I did a show called Sports Interview. It was a cable show, and it aired for 17 years. And my very first interview with that was in 1989, and it was with Mickey Mantle. And Mickey Mantle was at his restaurant. Mickey Mantle is on Central Park South in Manhattan. And I just knew with this show, I was in my 20s and I wanted to interview the most, incredible legends in sport. And they were older, but I wanted to, interview them. And I love sports history and just kind of collect these interviews that aired on MSG Network. And then I syndicated the show throughout the country. And Mickey was amazing. He was just, of course, he did drink, and so his handlers made sure I was at the restaurant before happy hour, and Mickey was very well behaved and just was a great storyteller. So that was my very first interview for my cable show, and then my very first interview, actually even before that, on WFAN my radio show, Hey Liguori, What's the Story?
Which I love the title too.
Thank you. That show aired for 25 years, every weekend for 25 years on the Fan. And I knew I'd have to make a big splash because women weren't hosting call-in sports shows back then. And so I thought, who could I book on this show as a guest? Who would be one of the most popular athletes and somebody in the news that would really get everybody's attention? And it was Doc Gooden. And I knew that it was hard to get him because he had just gotten out of Smithers rehab after the Mets won the World Series back in 1986, which I had covered for ABC Radio Sports Network. I was then hired to be a talk show host on the Fan, which just started on July 1st, 1987. And my first show was July 4th. So a couple weeks even before the show started, I connected with Doc Gooden at Shea Stadium. Back then it was Shea Stadium. And the PR guy was not letting anybody talk to Doc. So I kind of went around the PR director and went right up to Doc directly and told him about WFAN, the fact that this 24/7 sports station is going to come on the air in a couple weeks, and I'd like Doc to be my first guest. And he looked at me and he said, sure. So now I had to make sure that it was an exclusive interview. So I wanted to get him away from he was in the locker room at that point. I wanted to get him away from all the reporters that were in that locker room. So I asked him if he would follow me to an area where we could just do an interview without everybody around. And he said, great. And I cannot believe that we had to maneuver our way through just hordes of reporters. Everybody wanted to get an interview with Doc. And here I go. Doc's following me to the Jets locker room, which was quiet. And I did the interview there. And voila, it was the very first interview on my very first show on WFAN. Hey, Liguori, What's the Story? And it made all the papers. I mean, it was a huge get. Nobody else got them. I had the exclusive, and it was a good way to start Hey, Liguori, What's the Story on the Fan.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, the amount of you actually won an award. Right? It's the same award that Barbara Walters won, I believe. You were.
Oh yeah, there's been many awards through the years, thank goodness. But Barbara and a lot of incredible women. It was the American Women in Radio and TV. It was the Headliners Award. Right. I went down to Washington, D.C. and won that award. Good research. You do your research. Thank you. But yeah, I mean,
I'm wondering the day you find out that you won, right? I mean, I don't know if you knew ahead of time or one of those things where you show up and you find.
No, I knew ahead of time that I went down, and actually I'm going to pick up a Gracie Award in next Wednesday. It will be my second Gracie Award in 3 years for my Talking Golf radio show. I now do a show on WFAN from 7 to 8 on Sunday mornings called Talking Golf with Ann Liguori. And the Gracie Awards recognize female hosts talking about females. And, WFAN is such a male-dominated station, but I do try to talk about women's sports and promote women's sports. I've been doing that since I started back in 1987. And the interview that I did with Renee Powell, Renee is one of the chapters in the book. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that one yet, but Renee has had an incredible life. She's in her 70s now, but she's a Black woman who was on the LPGA Tour in the 60s and early 70s and really suffered from a lot of racism. And her father built a golf course in Ohio so that Black people could play golf and have a place to play. And his intention was to make it open to everybody, no matter what color, no matter, what gender. And so Renee is now running that whole golf facility, and they have an incredible education center there. And so we talked about her story beyond the book. I had her on my Talking Golf show on WFAN, and she said, Ann, boy, I want to write my book, but I feel like you just got everything out of me right here in this interview. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the interviews that won the Gracie Award. So I'm going to actually pick up that award at the Gracie Luncheon for Best Sports Show in the nation in a couple of weeks. So looking forward to that.
So like your first award, do you remember what that felt like? Was that you like Tom Cruise, you sliding across the floor in your underwear, or?
Just very humbled. I mean, I'm from a small town in Ohio, and never. I mean, I always dreamed big, and I always had just this incredible imagination. You're only limited by your imagination, right? And I just always, my parents were such great support. They just, when I was in high school, we did not have a girls' tennis team. So I played on the boys' team, and I played number one singles when I was a senior on the boys' team. And even before that, in junior high, we didn't have any sports for girls in my junior high school in Brecksville, Ohio. And so my dad helped me organize a track team that competed outside of school in AAU meets across Northeast Ohio. And so they were always very, very supportive and very encouraging, because it was tough for girls back then. We weren't really respected as athletes back in the 60s and 70s, and that's changed now. Women's sports has grown incredibly in the last 10, 15, 20 years. But when I was growing up, it wasn't cool to be a female athlete. I did it though, and I just thought, hey, I'm just gonna do my thing, and just see what I can do with it. But and then obviously getting into broadcasting, it was very, very tough as a woman in sports broadcasting in the 80s, because there weren't any jobs for women, very few jobs. So it's always been I've always been very grateful for any success that came my way, and never was handed anything. Always had to work so hard to accomplish anything, and I guess that's what keeps me hungry. That's what keeps me going, and the passion that I have for my career and for what I do, and it all keeps me going.
So I have to ask about the Billie Jean King interview. Did that happen at the time when they were doing the Battle of the Sexes, or is that before, after? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was after. Billie Jean King, for a long time, didn't get the recognition in sports that she deserved. It wasn't until the USTA, the United States Tennis Association, actually named the National Tennis Center after her. It's now called the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center. And she's there all 2 weeks of the US Open, and she gets so much recognition now, which is so great. And not just in tennis. I mean, she's doing so many other things for women in sports. And I just actually saw her at a dinner where she was honored by the Ireland Fund, because one of her first wins actually took place in Ireland. And so it was great to catch up with her. I was invited by Tourism Ireland to the dinner. But I interviewed her, I'm trying to remember, probably in the 90s. And that was after her Bobby Riggs match. And, she was always a visionary, and I recognized that. And I always thought she deserved so much recognition for, everything she did to help women in sports. And so great memories of Billie Jean. And the great thing is she's still going strong. She has not slowed down at all, which is so great to see.
I mean, with all your interviews, you've really met the cream of the crop in almost every field, right? In almost every type of sport that can be played. Is there an interview out there that you still think would be a great get, and you're striving for, like, oh, I'd love to get this person, but they don't do interviews, or
right. It's interesting. You're right. I mean, in sports, for that sports interview show,
Hank Aaron,
I
Joe
got Hank Aaron, I
DiMaggio.
got Ted Williams,
Ted
who was so
Williams.
hard to get. And every interview has a story behind it. And his son, John Henry, may he rest in peace, as well as Ted Williams. John Henry helped me get that interview with his father, Ted, when the All-Star game was in Boston in the late 90s. And
Starstruck a little bit?
No, at that point, I was not as starstruck as I was nervous to interview these guys, because, he's such an intimidating presence. I didn't get starstruck with these legends. I just really wanted to do the best interviews that I could. So I did as much research with each personality as I could, so that I was so prepared. And they were impressed with how prepared I was once the interview started. And and then when the Golf Channel show started, Conversations with Ann Liguori, which aired on the Golf Channel in the early days, I told the producer, when we came up with my show idea, that I would get the A-list of celebrities who played golf. So, and I did. Celine Dion, Matthew
Pesci, right? Joe Pesci,
McConaughey,
Matthew McConaughey.
Joe
Hmm.
Pesci, Samuel L. Jackson, gosh, Smokey Robinson, Alice Cooper, Sylvester Stallone. And I really worked hard to get that A-list of celebrities. And years later, producers would call me and say, "How did you get those people?" But yeah, it was fun. It was I don't know, I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. I worked so hard because I had two TV shows going at the same time weekly: the Sports Interview show and the Conversations with Ann Liguori show, and the Hey Liguori, What's the Story show on the Fan. So there was never a dull moment. I worked very hard.
Yeah, I mean, to get that opportunity though, to sit down and talk to Joe Pesci, right? About your shared passion for golf. Um, and just to get to talk to Joe DiMaggio. I mean, what is that moment like? I mean, is there a moment where I mean, you have to be humble to a certain extent, but I mean, is there a moment like right before you begin and think, wow, I'm about to talk to Joe DiMaggio. I'm about to talk
Oh
to Joe
yeah,
Pesci. Like, what's that
definitely. Well,
like?
they're all different, I have to say. Joe DiMaggio was older, and I was at the Downtown Athletic Club, and Rudy Riska, bless his heart, the executive director of the Downtown Athletic Club, which isn't around anymore, he knew me from my sports career, and he told me, look, he asked me if I would MC a dinner there, which honored Jim Brown, the great Jim Brown, who I interviewed many, many times. And so I got to know him from the Heisman. They did the Heisman Trophy Awards there. And I got to know him through that. And then he told me that Joe DiMaggio was coming in town to accept an award. And I said, well, is there any chance I could interview him? And he never did interviews. I mean, he was in his 80s at that point. And Rudy said, well, I'll ask him, because Rudy and Joe DiMaggio were very close. He said, I'll ask him and see what he says. And Joe was going to do Rudy a favor by talking with me. And I couldn't believe it. That was very, very special, because he did not do interviews. That was a radio interview, which I played on the Fan. And then
This is the best
Ted Cruz.
question you asked him, like the best answer you got from him on a
God,
question.
that was so long ago. Um, that was so long ago, and it was a little quick, because there were other people, reporters there, who did stick their microphones in to that interview, which I was still upset. And then they started clearing the tables from the dinner while I was talking to him, and you could hear like the dishes clinking, and then the silverware, and I was just so upset about that. But there are just so many other people. Like Joe Pesci was as feisty as you would expect to see him in the movies, and Casino or Goodfellas, or and I was a little nervous with Joe Pesci. I'm more nervous about, how they would react talking to me, because they didn't really know about the Golf Channel back then. It was still early. I did a lot of interviews before the Golf Channel was even on the air. We had to put them in the can, so to speak, before the season started. And so I had to really convince these personalities what the Golf Channel was, because they didn't know about it. Like
Yeah.
Sylvester Stallone. I went down to Doral in Miami to interview him. He was taking lessons from the pro there, Jim McClain. And Jim McClain said, and I have good news and bad news. The good news is Sylvester is here. He's in his limousine. The bad news is he doesn't know you. He doesn't know what the Golf Channel is. He's afraid you're going to ask all these questions about his personal life. So he doesn't really want to do the interview. Well, meanwhile, I had flown down from New York and had my camera crew there. And, there was a lot of money with the production budget already, there set up. The crew was set up. And so I quickly broke down the crew, and we got into the golf cart and zoomed to the range. And there was Sylvester Stallone. He looked like Popeye with his biceps on the range hitting balls. And I just knew I had to convince him in person to do the interview. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what the Golf Channel was. It wasn't even on the air yet. So I introduced myself, and I said, listen, Sylvester, this is about your passion for golf. You'll be very comfortable. And I see you're out here a lot. You're taking lessons. You love the game. You'll enjoy it. So I convinced him to do the show. So meanwhile, I had to delay him. I had to stall him while my camera crew went back to set up, which takes time, because I wanted it to be perfect with lighting and, the right audio and everything. And he comes to the set, and his agent was the one that made it impossible. His agent was looking at his watch, pacing back and forth in front of the cameras, and said, "You have 5 minutes." And I looked at him and I said, 5 minutes? This is a half-hour show. I need at least 30 minutes of interview. And then we're going to take our camera crew and follow him around on the golf course and get some B-roll, some footage of him playing. And it all worked out, but I was a brunette back then. I got so much gray hair after that experience. I became a blonde. So, he was great. In fact, after the interview, and I asked him some really great questions, and he's a very smart guy. He gave me a yo golf instead of a yo Adrian. But it's a really, and actually those interviews with those celebrities are in my first book called A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game. And that book came out years ago in the 90s. And then I did a revised edition in 2007. So you can get A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game. You can order that on Amazon, as well as Life on the Green, Lessons in Wisdom from Legends of Golf.
Well, I know I have to let you go. I mean, I've already taken up enough of your time today. I appreciate you doing this, like literally on location.
I am at the U.S. Open. That's fine.
So tell my listeners and viewers how they can learn more about you.
Well, they can visit me on Instagram at the Ann Liguori, ANNLIGUORI. I have a website, annliguori.com, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. You can find me.
You can find her, yeah.
And you can find the books, as I said, on Amazon, and you'll enjoy it, whether you play golf or not. It's just so uplifting and very motivating messages from some of the greats in the game.
Absolutely. It was a very positive read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, I'm sorry to say, like, I'm not even a golf person, but I loved your book.
Well, thank you so much. I love the fact that you love my book.
It was such a positive, just good feel, good vibe. Like I shouldn't. And I was like, yeah, like you just had that sense of like you could take on the world. Like this, like these were a collection of human beings who got it. Right, who figured out, the formula for living a successful life.
That's right. And it's a formula that we all can abide by. We just have to do it. We just have to choose to, to pursue our passion, to embrace our fears, to stay patient, to have an incredible work ethic. Annika talks about there's no secret to success. It really takes work. So the messages are just gems for sure.
Thank you for being here. I hope you'll come back and keep talking to me as you keep doing stuff.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to close the podcast. Say thanks for listening, everyone.